to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, who joins us now from the Central Lobby. Mr. Hancock, the Prime Minister has lost by 230 votes, an unprecedented number, the flagship policy of her administration. Why did she not announce her resignation tonight?
Well, because she's clearly the best person to lead this country to find a way through this difficult impasse. And
the House of Commons didn't think so. They voted by 230 against it.
Well, they clearly voted against the deal, but not against the Prime Minister. And by allowing time tomorrow to debate that question, the question of confidence in the government, we will, I very much hope and expect, confirm that the Commons supports the government to find a way through this, and that will allow the Prime Minister the time to discuss with senior parliamentarians, both on our side, because clearly Conservatives voted against as well, and also across the House, to find a way through. We're determined to deliver on the result of the referendum, but leaving without a deal at all is an ugly prospect, and a second referendum is not a good idea. And therefore, the Prime Minister will discuss with colleagues across the House to try to find a way through that can bring a majority in the Commons and therefore deliver on the referendum.
Mr. Hancock, can you give any historical precedent in which a Prime Minister has lost by this magnitude on a flagship policy and either not resigned or called a general election? Can you give me one example of when that's happened in the past?
Well, there have been quite a lot of unprecedented things going on recently.
Give me an example of this.
I don't have one. And
so there's not one?
Well, I don't have one, but that isn't the question in front of us. The question in front of us is what is the best thing to do in the national interests? And I profoundly believe that a second referendum would be extremely damaging to our politics, and that no deal is not a good idea. And I also believe that given that there is clearly, from the votes last week, a majority in the House against no deal, it must therefore be possible to find the majority for a deal which will allow us to deliver on that referendum result. And that is the work that the Prime Minister will be doing. I very much hope, once having won the confidence vote tomorrow, I won't prejudge that, we've got to have that debate, but my party is in no mood to hand over the reins to Jeremy Corbyn, because we saw that he's got absolutely no answers.
Yeah, but that's not the issue I'm asking you about.
Okay.
I just think that people will wonder, by how much more does the Prime Minister have to lose in a flagship issue, in something that is the core of her administration? She loses in the Commons, and yet she says she's not resigning. Right, but you say she's not resigning. I think people will be baffled that that's the case. Why?
Well, because the question you have, especially at big moments like this, important points in our history, is what is in the national interest. That's what guides me. As Health Secretary, I have to prepare for all eventualities, including no deal, even though I don't want that to happen. And I'm prepared to do that because it is in the national interest to do so. Likewise, the question of what we do to deliver on the referendum result is a vital one, and I think that leaving with no deal is no good.
No, we've heard all that. Let me Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you this, because you're repeating yourself. Let me ask you this. Is there a plan B? And if there is, what is it?
The plan is to allow the vote of confidence tomorrow, to win that, and then to engage with senior parliamentarians from all sides of the House, including on our side, DUP and opposition parties, to find where there is a majority for a deal. There's a clear majority against no deal, and therefore I profoundly hope that there is a majority for a deal.
So there isn't a plan B. That's what you're telling our viewers tonight. Although this defeat was widely forecast and widely foreseen by everybody, it would seem, except people like you and 10 Downing Street, there is no plan B. You're simply going to talk to other people. You don't have a plan B.
Yes, I've just laid out the plan very, very clearly.
No, that's a process. What would be the substance of plan B? What would need to change in the agreement for it to be plan B?
Well, this is the thing about listening, Andrew, is that you listen before you pronounce. So the Prime Minister will be... that the Prime Minister will listen and engage with parliamentarians right across the House.
I would have thought I'll just remind you, it's almost 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years since we voted to leave the European Union, and you're still just listening. You lost by 230 votes tonight. What possible concessions could the European Union make that would bridge that 230 gulf? Name me one.
Well, a whole series of demands on the EU to make additions or changes were made during the debate. I mean, some people were just against the deal for their own political reasons.
So I asked you, what could the European Union now do that would overturn a majority against you of 230?
Well, there were a whole series of points raised in the debate over the last 5 days. That was what I was saying.
Well, but give me one major change the European Union could now make that would make the deal palatable to a majority in that chamber.
No, Andrew, the thing about listening is that you listen before ministers pronounce.
Well, Minister, you're clearly not listening to me because I'm asking you quite a simple question and you're refusing to answer it. What major change could the European Union now make that would overturn a majority of 230 against the May deal? Give me one.
Andrew, you can keep asking the same question, and I'll keep giving you the same answer.
Well, you're not giving me an answer at all, Minister.
I am giving you a very clear answer, which is that we are going to listen to the Commons and listen to the senior parliamentarians who the Prime Minister is going to engage in. If I came straight out of the House of Commons and came to your in front of your camera and immediately announced the results of those discussions, then that would be entirely prejudging the fact that we're going to listen.
I'm not asking for the result. You have pointed... No, excuse me, Minister. You have pointed out that MPs made a number of points of changes, substantive changes they wanted. What I'm trying to get from you is what sort of substantive change, because we're not talking about a majority that you've lost by 10, 15, 20, even 50 votes. What would overturn a majority against you of 230? Give me an idea.
This is precisely the process that the Prime Minister is going to go through. I know that you don't like the answer that I've given you, but that is the answer. And
it's not an answer to the question I'm asking. It may be a very good answer to a different question, but it's not an answer to the question that I'm asking you.
But that's because what happens if you're a minister and you say, we're going to do this or that, is that it gets set in stone. The whole point about listening is that you allow the debate and the discussions to happen, and the Prime Minister is going to have those discussions.
So what's the time, if you can't give me the substance, what's the timetable here? The Prime Minister listens yet again, there's more discussions yet again, but by next Monday night she has to come forward with a plan B, is that correct?
With a statement, yes, that'll be put to the House in terms of the way forward.
And then she goes to Europe to then see if Europe will agree to the changes that she might have agreed with in discussions with the other parties?
That's exactly right. She said very clearly in her statement that she will entertain proposals that are potentially negotiable. So that's right. She'll then have to take those to the EU and explain that the deal that she negotiated with the EU clearly hasn't been accepted by the Commons and can't be ratified as is, and therefore take the results of those discussions that I'm not going to prejudge and take them to the EU.
So we are now talking about not clarifications or reassurances. We're talking about reopening the agreement negotiations. We're talking about reopening what's already been agreed.
Well, clearly, what's already been agreed with the EU has not been agreed with the House of Commons, and the deal for leaving the EU has to be agreed with both. And I think it's unfortunate. I wish the vote tonight had gone in the government's
But we are
favour,
talking about reopening the agreement. Is that correct?
The Prime Minister will judge what is potentially negotiable. She said that she'll have discussions on the basis of proposals that are potentially negotiable.
Well, if you're going to negotiate, that means you're reopening the agreement or going to attempt, aren't you right?
Well, of course there's going to have to be changes. Of course there have.
So you will have to change the agreement that 51 days ago your government agreed with the EU.
Well, clearly we made the agreement, both the withdrawal agreement and the future relationship. We made those agreements with the EU.
But you want to reopen them now?
Well, we clearly have to make changes in order to have a deal with the EU that can also command the support of the House of Commons.
All right. I put it to you, Minister, that if any of these changes, as a result of the discussions, of which you won't tell us any idea of the outcome, that any substantive changes or major changes, such as the Labour Party may well want on a customs union, or the single market, or various other things that the Scottish Nationalists may want, or even the DUP, that given the nature of the radical changes they may well want, you cannot negotiate that without asking for an extension of Article 50, which delays our departure. Are we agreed?
No, I don't think that's. I don't
Really?
think that's the case at all. No, because the EU is very good at negotiating down to the wire and negotiating fast where necessary.
But you're asking to reopen the agreement. Surely that will take longer.
Well, clearly the changes to the deal that we've just put to the Commons on lost on are going to have to be negotiated with the EU.
Do you rule out the extension of Article 50?
That's not what I want to see. I want to see us delivering on Brexit on the 29th.
I know you don't want to see it, but I ask you, do you rule it out if it's necessary to get a new agreement or revise the existing one?
I don't believe that it's necessary to extend the Article 50 deadline in order to get a deal, not least because the negotiations, the discussions with colleagues across the House are now going to proceed apace, with a result of that on Monday night. And we know that the EU can negotiate quickly if necessary, especially when the circumstances demand it.
The Labour Party wants Britain to remain in a customs union. Is that up for negotiation by the government?
Well, you can ask me as many questions on this as you like, but I'm afraid, Andrew, I can't prejudge the discussions that the Prime Minister is going to have. I mean, that is precisely why I've kept answering the same way.
Well, so if the Labour Party and the Scottish Nationalists and the Welsh Nationalists and the Greens all say we want to remain in some sort of customs union, the government will give that serious consideration.
I am simply not going to rule out anything that is a potentially negotiable way through that delivers a deal that is in the national interest, good for the UK, and can pass the House of Commons, that is negotiable with the EU. That is what we're going to try to achieve in the coming days.
Mr. Hancock, I know this will come as news to you, but we are learning from Brussels that the EU will rule out any kind of special summit this weekend to begin any kind of reopening of the existing agreement. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that no deal, which is what happens under UK law, unless a deal is reached, no deal is extremely damaging to the European Union.
But they are ruling out reopening the agreement, which has always, to be fair, been their position since they signed it.
Well,
what do you do then?
Well, firstly, that's a discussion that we will need to have because they don't want no deal either.
But they're ruling out reopening the agreement. What do you do?
Well, and the other point is that there are two parts to the proposals. There's both the withdrawal agreement and there's also the future relationship.
I'm aware of that. They're ruling out the withdrawal agreement being reopened. What do you now do?
We don't. we listen to the House of Commons, and we win the confidence vote.
The Brussels isn't listening to you.
Well, the thing is that the EU don't want to have no deal either, so
they're not prepared to open the agreement. Minister, what happens?
The thing is, though, Andrew, all throughout the negotiation over the last 2 years, we heard things out of different bits of Brussels saying, we won't do this and we won't do that. For ages they said, we won't have anything other than a Northern Ireland only backstop, and we ended up with a UK-wide backstop.
Well, that's because you volunteered to jump into the backstop. It was the British government that decided to do that. Brussels didn't ask for that.
No, certainly not. Brussels.
The negotiations,
I don't know whether
Minister.
you've not been following it, Andrew. Brussels were dead set against that, and they said repeatedly, "We will not do that," and we successfully negotiated it. The thing about a negotiation is that people set out their starting point.
What do you do, Minister, if the European Union says, "Look, you have just lost by too much. There's nothing we can conceivably give you that can overturn a majority against you of 230. It's just not worth it." What do you do then?
Well, I think that it would be worth, in those circumstances, explaining to our colleagues in Europe that no deal is damaging to them, and it is not necessary to have.
They haven't worked that out themselves.
Well, because we've said that we will take back to Brussels what we think is potentially negotiable, and the Commons can accept. Of course we're going to have to make ask of Brussels, and it is the natural starting point of the EU to protect their position. It's entirely understandable, but we need a negotiated agreement that can be ratified on this side. And an agreement isn't an agreement until it's ratified, and we've just lost the vote, essentially the ratification vote,
right.
And therefore we need to find a new way through.
Minister, we've taken too much of your time. We thank you for that. We better let you go. Matthew Hancock there, the Health Minister. Now, just to recap, in case you're just joining us,